So in this second part of the two-part series, I'm going to pick up that machine learning model that I ended up training and deploying using gradient boosting, cat boosting algorithm, and I'm going to serve it up using Flask, and I want to show you the backend code exactly how I did it and how it ended up looking like. So I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so in this second part of the two-part series, we are going to pick up the trained and deployed cardiovascular disease prediction model that we deployed using gradient boosting catboost algorithm. If you remember, we created this pickle file. We are going to pick that up and we are going to serve it up using Flask. Now, this is not meant to be comprehensive training for Flask, so I'm not going to get into how each and every single component works. Rather, I'm just going to get into the details of my specific model, how I use Flask to serve it up. If you want to get a comprehensive overview of the Flask, how that Flask environment is set up, there are many other tutorials over the internet and over at YouTube that you can always refer back to. And if you want, I can always have some links down below so that you can always go back and look at some of those tutorials. So if you remember, in the first part we ended up generating our pickle file because we dumped our trained model into pickle so that it can be served up using Flask. And the few pieces that I can quickly perhaps touch on, the key pieces are the application that's a requirement for Flask, as well as we have a secondary request file, and we have what we refer to as the index HTML file that's in here. So that's how you're actually interacting and interfacing with the web browser. That's what Flask is used for. And of course we have the style sheet as well. If you want to style it up a little bit, you can do that by tweaking that CSS file, and we'll look at them briefly in this tutorial. So let's jump straight into it. If you remember, I mentioned that app is the big one. Then there is a secondary request file. Then we have that index HTML that we need to define or create. Then we have the style sheet. So we'll get to see each and every single one of them briefly. The first one I wanted to show you is the app file, and follow somewhat of the same pattern because we're using Python in here. So we have numpy imported, we must have Flask, and from that Flask we are going to import multiple libraries. We're going to import Flask, request, render template, etc. We're also importing pickle one more time. In this app we need that. We are going to define the model. So we are going to pick up the model, the pickle model, and we're going to classify it as being the model. And then we define that predict function. So this is where the real stuff comes in. As you can see that there are some variables that I'm having to define. So there is this integer features that I defined. Then there is the final feature that's looking at an array of integer features. Then finally we are going to get the prediction defined by predicting based on the final features and our model. So the output of that array, the 0 value of the array, is the prediction value that we need. So that's our output. Then we have defined possibility, and we are looking at the model, and we pick up the final features, and that's how we define the possibility. Then we have the probability, which is just picking up that possibility value and formatting it a certain way. So that's what we are going to pass, the probability, to decide what the results are, and we are going to show that result based on that. So I have an if else condition here. So if the output is giving us a 0 value, so that's the output that we define here, output, then we are going to render this statement. So we're going to show this statement here. So we're going to show that predicted that there is no cardiovascular disease, and then we are going to show the percentage, or the value, the probability of that. So for that we are going to get that probability that we defined previously, and if the value is otherwise 1, then we're going to say, okay, we have a cardiovascular disease here, and then we're going to format the probability value and display it as well. So that's what we are doing here. We are returning the values and we are displaying it a certain way, and again we'll see it in just a moment. Now the next thing that we are doing, again, these are all standards. If you look at any Flask environment setup, app is the key file that you need to look at, and that's where everything is defined essentially. You'll notice that there are certain things that are standard. It's not like I'm a super expert on Flask or anything, but it's very intuitive in my mind to follow what they're trying to do. And as you can see that I commented out a few, so it's not like I got into a Flask app, I picked up an existing template and I was able to just right off the bat deploy it. No, I had to experiment with it a little bit. So that's why you see there are so many commented out statements here, because I wanted to see what gets generated how. So I experimented with it a little bit, and that's how I ended up cleaning up my app file. Now the reason I kept those comments to show that it's a little bit of a trial and error and playing with it and tweaking it a little bit. So it's not like you're going to just go pick up a Flask file and there you go, it's already served. You have to play with it. And then there is the results, which is again the standard in any app file, I've noticed, and that's how we're going to show the results. Now this is where we have that second file, or second file that comes into play, which is a request. And this is essentially the way we are picking up the value from the values that are provided initially as the input values. So how does that request file look? Fairly straightforward. There's only one line, and we are just picking up all of the data and we are just passing it along to our model. That's all there is to it. Okay, so then that's that. So that's one part, right? If you remember, there are a few things that we talked about. So there is your app, there is your request, there is your pickle file that you must bring in here to set up the environment. Now the next thing that we're going to look at is the index.html. So this is where this file comes into play. This is your actual web code, right? The index.html. Briefly, you've got this standard. I defined it as cardiovascular disease prediction, and maybe we can switch back and forth at this point how that actually looks. So if I open this one up, so this is how it looks at the end of the day when I was able to serve it up. So you've got the cardiovascular disease prediction, or CVD prediction, right on top as a title. I put in a logo, nice logo on top of that, and then these are all the input fields, right? So you've got age, gender, height, weight. I think it's called systolic blood pressure, or high end of the blood pressure and the low end of the blood pressure. You've got the cholesterol, glucose, smoker indicator, alcohol indicator, and activity indicator. So those are input fields. Now if I go back to the actual file, index.html file, you'll notice that that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get that set up here, the HTML page. So you've got that cardiovascular disease prediction, CVD prediction right on top, and then we have all the different input values that are coming in, and as I'm displaying them, I'm actually modifying them so they format, they align a certain way. Again, I had to experiment with it a little bit. It wasn't like I just dumped up my code and everything was ready to go. That wasn't the case at all. I had to play and get it cleaned up a little bit. So this is your age, gender, and then the values, because some of them are dropped down. Maybe I'll just switch back and show you. So in this case, you can see the first field that I see that's actually a drop down is your gender, and the way we know is if I go back into the actual file and if I click on it, there are two options here, female or male. So that's what this gender drop down is, and that's what this index HTML is doing for us. So that's that. And then you keep going back again, getting all the different values. You've got placeholders to pick up those values, and you're doing that for all the different fields until you get into cholesterol. Again, it becomes a drop down. So that's why you've got three different values: normal, above normal, and well above normal. Is that how it shows up? Let's check. So if I click on that cholesterol, normal, above normal, well above normal. So that's how we are defining them, or we are showing them in our file. I'll go back in here. After that, we have only a few more fields left. Smoker, again, fields with drop down, non-smoker and smoker. And you've got alcohol consumption, 0, do not consume alcohol, and 1, consume alcohol. Activity, I believe, is the final one, which is saying inactive or active, a drop down. So that's what we are doing here. Then I've got a button here. So if you press on that button, it goes back and it comes back and says predict the patient CVD profile. So let's check if that's how it is. See, predict patient CVD profile. That's the button. So as soon as you click on the button, it picks up all the values, all the entries, uses that request file, and we can always go back and look at that request file, picks up the values, sends it back to our app file, and then it calls up the predict, and then it runs all of the predict function statements to ultimately return whether the person is prone for cardiovascular disease or not. If you remember, it says model predicts following for providing patient data: no cardiovascular disease, and with the data or odds or probability, and then if not, yes, cardiovascular disease and the probability. So that's how it shows up. I wanted to quickly show you the style sheet. A lot of tweaking here as well. It's cool, I think, in a way, to play with this, and you can tweak and modify. You can change the colors, you can change the format. Essentially, you're doing some styling to none other than the page, the HTML page. That's all you're doing in that. So how that button is going to look, how they're going to align, what's going to be the color, the backend, and all of that stuff are being defined in that style CSS file or style sheet. So that's that. I hope you get a sense. Now, once I did that deploy with Flask, it was ready, and I can essentially show myself how it looks, and this is exactly how it looks, the HTML page, and I can, if I have my laptop to show to my client, I can run a situation or a scenario easily through here. Now, the challenge is you might be working in a different laptop, or you may need to have that Flask environment being served up by some cloud hosting environment, so you can have access to it from any other place. For that, I experimented with a few options there. I looked up what are some of the free options that are out there. There's Heroku. There are many other ones. You're more familiar with perhaps Azure, a cloud hosting environment, or AWS. But for this specific need, because it's so limited in terms of what I need to display and in terms of space that I need, I ended up selecting Python Anywhere, this third-party cloud hosting platform there. So all I did, once everything was cleaned up and ready to go, all I had to do is just pick up my index, CSS, and I had to pick up my app and my request file as well as the pickle file. That's all we needed to pick up, and I had to upload them into that environment that I set up in Python Anywhere, and I could essentially show it to anyone over the internet as long as I have access to some web browser. So that's what I did. Now, before we go, I just wanted to quickly run a test case randomly just to show you how this works. So age, I'm gonna say maybe it's newborn, or not even a newborn, maybe a toddler or a child. So I'm gonna say 365, a female. I'm gonna say height, I'm just gonna guess here, I don't even know what a 2-year-old height is. Randomly I'm just gonna pick I don't know, 20 or so. And then weight, I'm gonna say 1 kg maybe. Blood pressure, I'm just gonna say very normal, and maybe 70. Cholesterol is normal, glucose normal, smoker, non-smoker, does not consume any alcohol. And I guess, I mean, just for the positive scenario, I'm just gonna say that the child is active, and let's see what the result is going to be. So if I run it, this is how it shows, right? Model predicts following for provided patient data: no cardiovascular disease, and the odds of cardiovascular disease is very low, 0.01 or 1%. That's the positive case. Now if I go to maybe 35,000 days for age, male, I'm gonna say don't know, I'm just going to go with say this is in centimeter, so if it's 2.54, let me just get my calculator here real quick. All right, so if I say 2.54 centimeters, or times it by, if someone is 6 feet, that's 72. We're gonna say 183, maybe 183 centimeters. Weight, I'm gonna say overweight, perhaps 200. And quite high blood pressure on both ends, maybe 90. Cholesterol, I'm just gonna say well above normal. Glucose above normal. Person is a smoker. Person consumes alcohol, and very inactive. So now let's click on that, and now let's look at what the model has to say. The model predicts following for the provided patient data: the person has cardiovascular disease or prone to cardiovascular disease, and the probability of cardiovascular disease is extremely high, 99%. Now I showed you the two extremes. Chances are that when you're doing that random sampling, you'll fall somewhere in the middle, right? So it's not going to be 99% or 1% always. It's going to be maybe 20%, 30% odds of cardiovascular disease or not. So that's how it looks. And I hope you found this second part of the tutorial just as beneficial. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, feel free to write a comment, send me an email, or get in touch in any other ways that you want. And as always, please smash that like button or the subscribe button, like and comment. Thank you so much.